Hey guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. On this episode, we're going to review the latest release in Neil Young's wonderful Archives series, the gift that keeps on giving. At long last, Chrome Dreams has been released officially. Neil Young's Chrome Dreams. There's Neil. Now, before this officially came out, I and probably many of you already knew that it was awesome because most of us, or a lot of us, already owned it in bootleg form. Here, I got another one here. This is probably his most bootlegged album ever. A little bit of background here. So Chrome Dreams. This was one of these. This happens a lot with Neil. He puts an album together. It's ready to go, and then he shelves it at the last minute, and then puts something else out. In this case, it was he shelved Chrome Dreams at the last minute and then put out American Stars and Bars, which has some of the material from Chrome Dreams, but also is quite different. You know, it's a very different album as well. But now we have Chrome Dreams. So, the reason this is so bootlegged, first of all, is an acetate of the record that Neil, had prepared got out somehow, and that's what was bootlegged so much. That's what I have there. There's a lot of different versions of it, and really in the 1990s is when these bootlegs of Chrome Dreams like just sort of prolifically were produced, and are out there. But anyway, at long last, we have an official release. So a little bit of background on this. This was supposed to come out in 1977. It is actually comprised of tunes from multiple different sessions from 1974 to 1976. And listening to this now, I think the impact is substantially kind of blunted from what it would be, because almost all of this was mined by Neil Young, and some of these tracks were either reworked or kind of in these versions sprinkled on future releases. So, we've heard most of this material in one form or another. And so it's interesting talking about this because you've got to try and sort of put yourself in the alternate universe, the alternate Neil Young universe of the archives. And, what if this had come out in 1977? What impact would it have had? I would argue huge. I would argue that this, had it come out in 77, would have been one of his substantial 1970s releases. I mean, it's that good. I think it would have been a 5-star album. But, like I said, the impact of a lot of these songs aren't quite, what they would be because you have them sprinkled on later releases. And so it is interesting in that sort of alternate universe. If Chrome Dreams had come out, then American Stars and Bars, Freedom, Rust Never Sleeps, Hawks and Doves, all of these would have at least been somewhat or substantially different because all of them contain some material that originally was going to be Chrome Dreams, even if some of the versions of the songs were re-recorded a little bit, or had some stuff added in the studio or whatever. Not only that, but I think the impact of this has even been blunted even more by the archives releases, because some of the other lost 70s albums that have come out in recent years in the archives, like Hitchhiker and Homegrown, also contain material that is also here. So, between all of that, this, it doesn't quite have the power that it would, but you've got to try and sort of pretend put yourself in that alternate universe to really judge this. It's like, what would have this been if it had come out in '77? You didn't have, these songs on the, because think about it this way: if that had happened, this coming out would have been the first time people would have heard Pocahontas, Star of Bethlehem, Like a Hurricane, Too Far Gone, Homegrown, Sedan Delivery, Powderfinger, Look Out for My Love. All those songs would have appeared for the first time together on one record. You can imagine how powerful that was. Now, of course, these versions are quite different than some of the versions that came out later. Like Powderfinger is a solo acoustic. Not the Crazy Horse version you hear on Rust Never Sleeps. But again, we've heard this solo acoustic version in recent years because it's the version that comes out on Hitchhiker. So the one of these other archives releases. So, but trying to judge this on its own merits, I mean, it really is an incredible listen. Um, it opens with, well, Pocahontas, and then Will to Love, which eventually was put on American Stars and Bars. A beautiful, delicate acoustic love song, almost 7 minutes, that Neil recorded, with the crackling fire in the fireplace, behind him. This kind of dreamy metaphor of salmon going up the river to die, but to mate and die, and it's really a remarkable song. Then Star of Bethlehem, then Like a Hurricane. It's kind of interesting. So this is a lot of this is very kind of acoustic, or on the acoustic side. But then there's a few songs like a Hurricane all of a sudden comes in and just bursts through the speakers, right? Too Far Gone, which I've always loved, which we didn't hear an official version of Too Far Gone until 1989 on Freedom, right? And but this is sort of a more stripped back version than that, with just Neil on acoustic and Frank San Pedro playing, I think, a 1917 mandolin, which is interesting. Hold Back to the Tears has an extra verse in here. Homegrown is the Crazy Horse version on here. Captain Kennedy is on here, which eventually came out on Hawks and Doves. String Man, drop dead, gorgeous piano ballad, which we didn't hear any sort of official release until he in the '90s. It was on, I have it in here somewhere, but the Unplugged album he released in the '90s. He finally played that on that Unplugged album. But until then, we hadn't heard that song officially released, and it's just a stunner. One of these stunning songs that he just had in the vaults in the '70s and never bothered to put out for some crazy reason. A beautiful song. Um, I've heard different accounts. Some say it's a sort of a tribute or a song about Stephen Stills. Others have said it's a song about Jack Nietzsche. Who knows? But it's a beautiful song nonetheless. Sedan Delivery, which of course on Rust Never Sleeps is taken at about twice the speed than it is here. This is interesting. The Sedan Delivery on here is it's kind of a boozy, kind of slower jam than on that kind of speedy version that ends up on Rust Never Sleeps. Of course, Powderfinger again, like I told you, the solo acoustic version of that. I think his maybe his best set of lyrics. Just incredible storytelling on Powderfinger, like Robbie Robertson level. And then closing out with "Look Out for My Love," which eventually ended up on. I didn't even show that one, but "Comes a Time." It's so it's another song that, or another album that ended up with some Chrome Dream stuff. But yeah, for the Neil Young fan, if you don't have some of these other albums, or if you're the fanatic like me, it's it's worth it to have to finally hear it together, in its own piece. So yeah, like I said, I think this is a 5-star album if it had been released in its proper time period, 1977, or even earlier in the archives releases. In some way, I think maybe he should have put this out prior to Hitchhiker and prior to Homegrown. Because I don't know, because it is sort of his most, I guess, coveted, lost album in some ways. So yeah, worth getting if you're the huge fan like I am. Now, speaking of the huge fan, at long last, here on Amity Tracks, we're gonna do Neil Young. I've been threatening for a year, and and people, our loyal viewers, people have been asking, when are you gonna do Neil? When are you gonna do Neil? It's a huge undertaking, but I think we're ready to do it, so we're gonna do it. So yeah, the next artist, in the next few episodes is gonna be Neil Young. And so, mercurial, maddening, brilliant, ever curious, releases something almost every other day, it seems. But we're going to get into it. So here's how I'm going to organize it. The next two episodes are going to be ranking, counting down, in my view, his studio albums. There's 43 of them by my count. I'm not putting in the archives studio releases. I'll address that in a second. So these are just the regular studio albums that he's released over his career, kind of in order, and we're gonna rank them worst to best. I am including "Time Fades Away," which is I know that's live, but it's all new material, so it acts kind of like a studio record in some ways. So I'm including "Time Fades Away." So if you add all that up, subtract whatever, 43. I'm gonna try and spread that out over about two episodes. And then an episode after that, I do want to dive into the archives, Neil Young's amazing archives series sets, unravel that puzzle, okay, and because it is substantial, and there are some amazing gems in the archive series. So I want to have an episode where we can, and that's where I can address Hitchhiker and Homegrown and Toast, and then all these live albums that he's put out, through the archives as well. Plus these two massive box sets. So far, we have Volume One, Volume Two. Volume Three is set to come out next year, but you never know with Neil Young's timetables. So yeah, and I'm thinking in that episode I can also then quickly address some of the soundtracks he's done, the regular live albums he's put out, um, you know the few compilations he's got out there, and kind of wrap it up that way. That's the plan, at least. So we'll see. I can go ahead and just kind of talk about Neil Young and what he's meant to me here. So in the next episodes, we can just dive right into the albums. But yeah, Neil Young is my favorite artist. He has been, he sort of vied with Bruce Springsteen, in the years, but I've kind of settled on Neil as my ultimate artist in the last couple decades. So Neil Young is, now, as you'll see, I don't love everything. Even Neil diehards, I don't know anyone who loves everything he's done. You'd have to be kind of nuts, because he's put out some bad albums, which actually makes it fun to talk about. It gets dull if you're just praising everything. It's fun to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we'll do that with Neil Young's albums. But yeah, Neil Young, I just admire him so much. He's, if you look at his '70s run, I think it rivals David Bowie, or I don't know, Springsteen, whoever else had amazing runs in that decade. Neil Young is right there, and I think he's been fascinating ever since. So real quick, also what we're not going to be covering, or we're not going to get into the Buffalo Springfield stuff because we already did that, right? So if you want to go back, we did a whole episode just doing the Buffalo Springfield material. So great video. Go watch that if you're interested in the Buffalo Springfield years. Uh, I'm not going to get into the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young stuff. I'm going to save that. We're going to we'll do a video down the road, looking at that. Crosby, Stills, Nash, and sometimes Young. Looking at that stuff. Um, I guess one record I could just mention real quick because I'm not going to include it in the countdown. I'm not doing "Long May You Run," the one-off Stills Young Band. The album he made with Stephen Stills. Uh, I don't think it's very good. This was it 1976 when this came out, and I think it's got mostly third tier Neil Young material. I don't think he wasn't given his top material to this project, and Stills wasn't in great shape, so he wasn't bringing A-list material either. Now, the one exception here is, of course, the title track, Neil Young's "Long May You Run," which is gorgeous. I mean, that is a classic. So that's the one song I think that really lasts off of this, which is great. But yeah, and of course the famous incident on this tour, kind of shows you the mercurial nature of working and dealing with Neil Young, right? It's a real infamous story. I'll tell it here, so it won't take up time in the other videos since we're talking about this album anyway. So they went on tour for this, Neil and Stephen Stills, which would have been like a dream come true for so many people. For me, even today, if Neil and Stills hit the road together, I would. But so they were on tour, and in the midst of this tour that they had booked, and they were heading into I don't know. For some reason, this Atlanta keeps coming to mind. I don't remember if it's Atlanta or not. They were going into some town where they had a show, you know, later, on this tour, and Neil just decides he's done. And it wasn't happening, and so he bolts, and he just leaves a message for Stills. It said, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, funny how things, quickly things get started and then and then change, and eat a peach. I guess they were going to Georgia because Neil signed off with "Eat a peach, Neil," and that was it. And it just left Stills holding the bag, with these dates. There were, people bought tickets to see Neil Young and Stephen Stills, and Stills, I think, honorably finished the tour on his own with the band. But that, you never know when Neil's gonna. You think he's gonna take a right turn, he's gonna take a left turn. And this is a great example of that. But anyway, so I'm super excited. So I guess in the comments, if you have heard Chrome Dreams, either in bootleg form or you got this new official version, what do you guys think about it? Let's talk Chrome Dreams, and stay tuned to the next few episodes because we're getting into Neil Young, guys. We'll see you next time. Oh, subscribe and like and hit the bell for notifications. All that stuff. Please. See you later.